Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's episode will be a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about how to start a game. Now, I'm sure everybody watching has probably played a game of Magic before, which would logically mean that you know how to start a game. But do you really? There's a lot of steps that are taken before gameplay starts, and in most cases, the exact order doesn't really matter, which means in the handful of times that it does, it's possible for a bit of confusion to arise. I'm going to be going through all of those steps and having a little bit of commentary on top of that. Ready? Let's get started. Well, first of all, the most important part of the episode, so I'm putting it at the very front so the most number of people possible can see it. Everything that's part of the pregame procedure, what we're talking about today, all of it can be completed before the round timer starts. Now this includes deciding who goes first, revealing companions, and taking mulligans. Rules as written, it's actually a little bit ambiguous about whether revealing leylines and such counts as part of this, but I think it's very unlikely that a judge would object to you doing that too. So yeah, bottom line, if you and your opponent are both sitting there waiting for the head judge to finally start the round clock, you can resolve mulligans while you're waiting. Just make sure that you hold off on any actual gameplay until the clock starts. So with that, let's take a look at what the pregame procedure looks like. The first step is, well, exactly that, to decide who's going first. And already there are a surprising number of ways that this can play out. If it's game 2 or subsequent of a match, it's pretty straightforward. Whoever lost the previous game gets to decide whether to play first in each subsequent game. In the case where a game ends in a draw, the player who made this choice in the drawn game makes it again for the next game. In case you're wondering how this works in multiplayer formats, I have no idea. It's not defined in Magic's policy documents because any events where there are more than 2 players in a match are customarily played best of 1 for obvious reasons related to time. Now, for game 1, the players can use any mutually agreeable method to determine who goes first. This method does not necessarily need to be random, nor does it technically need to have an equal chance for each player. That said, there are some practical constraints. You can't do something that takes a long time or is otherwise disruptive to the tournament. So no contests over who can shout the loudest or whatever. I suppose it doesn't specifically say this anywhere in the rules, but you can't withhold relevant information from your opponent when proposing a method. So you can't propose a high roll and bring a set of loaded dice. Well, you could, but you might have to convince a judge that technically what you did wasn't against the rules, which good luck with that. In the playoff matches, after the final cut has been made, you don't need to worry about any of that because the player with the better seed gets to choose. Oh yeah, and if it's an arch-enemy game, the arch-enemy always goes first. And all this goes out the window if someone has the conspiracy power play, which supersedes all that and lets its controller play first. Although if multiple copies of that card are involved, you would need to go back to that other stuff that I just talked about. Are you surprised? I myself didn't really appreciate how much stuff goes into this one step until I started writing the script. The next step in starting the game is to reveal stuff. Players present their sideboards, reveal companions, and move commanders to the command zone, in that order. Then, each player chooses 3 sticker sheets if they're using them, and then each player may put any number of conspiracies from their sideboard into the command zone. For each of these steps, use app-nap ordering, with the starting player taking the role of the active player. Check out my dedicated video on this topic if you'd like a full explanation, but for here, I'll just point out that because most of the common situations that could come up involve revealing a card that started out hidden from the opponent, the official way to do this resembles the process for cards like Show and Tell. For example, if multiple people need to reveal companions, each of them, in turn order, either points to a face-down card in their sideboard or says, "I'm not using one," and then all the companions are flipped face-up at the same time. After this, the next step is for each player to shuffle their library and present it to the opponent for additional shuffling. Any supplemental decks, such as schemes, planes, or attractions, are also shuffled and presented at this time. Once each player has had an opportunity to shuffle their opponent's library, the next step is for each player to get an opening hand. Like with deciding who goes first, there's actually more steps to this than you might have realized. So first, each player would draw a number of cards equal to their starting hand size. Then, in app-nap order, each player may decide to take a mulligan. Once each player has made this declaration, all the mulligans are taken simultaneously. This process continues until all players have decided to keep. The act of taking a mulligan includes the part where you put cards from your hand onto the bottom of your library, although players customarily do not physically do this every time, but rather only if they plan on keeping the hand. This could make a minor difference if a card like Serum powder is involved, though. The way this card works is anytime a player is making a decision about whether to mulligan, if Serum powder is in their hand, that player may use Serum powder before deciding whether to mulligan. This means if you mold a 6 and your new hand contains Serum powder, the part where you put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library happens before you have the opportunity to use Serum powder. After a player declares a keep, the cards that that player has become their opening hand, and that player cannot take further mulligans. Once all the players have kept, everyone gets an opportunity to take advantage of effects from cards in their opening hands. The way these work is that the starting player gets the first opportunity and can take any number of these actions in any order that they want. After that, each other player goes in turn order and does likewise. Somewhat non-intuitively, this does not work like mulligans or priority in that you get one opportunity to take all your actions, and after that point, the window closes. For example, officially it is not possible to put a Leyline in, see your opponent reveal a Chancellor, and then after that decide to put a second Leyline in. Another consequence of this is that if the player who's going second has a Gemstone Caverns, they will know whether their opponent has any Leylines or such when deciding which card to exile. It is not possible for the first player to use any opening hand effects after the second player starts this process for himself. And after all of this, there's one last step, but it only happens in Planechase games. You have to get a starting plane, and here's how that works. If anyone's ever played that format, be sure to let me know in the comments. Now, like I said earlier, any of the stuff that we've talked about so far is part of the pregame procedure, and it's totally legal to do any of it before the round clock starts. There's a small asterisk in that officially the MTR says the game is considered to have begun after all players have taken mulligans, but given that the Leyline step and the choosing a plane step are so minor compared to the mulligan step, I think it's reasonable to interpret that those might have been omitted for brevity and clarity rather than by intention. And now that we've come to the start of the gameplay, you should be fully prepared to actually, start a game. Let's close out with a few challenge questions to test your understanding. First up, Amy loses game 1, both players present their decks, and while both players are shuffling each other's decks, Amy says she wants Nick to play first in game 2 rather than herself. Nick now wants to re-sideboard. Is this allowed? And the answer is no. This is really tricky because if you look in the CR, the first step of the pregame process is for you to choose who's playing first. Setting aside your sideboard happens in the next step, which is explicitly stated to take place after the starting player is determined, along with choosing companions. Shuffling and presenting your deck happens in the step after that, so this really makes it seem like it should be possible to change your main deck and sideboard configuration after the starting player is determined, but before you officially present. The MTR gives a different set of steps though. According to that document, players shuffle and present their decks first, presenting their sideboards as part of this step. After that, companions are declared, and only then does the appropriate player need to say whether they're going first or second. Now, if you were paying attention, this is exactly the opposite order that those three things were supposed to happen according to the CR. So, which is right? Well, usually the CR is more careful about being technically correct rather than simply endeavoring to convey the information in a generally correct but much more easily approachable format. I'd say the CR ordering makes the most sense because a lot of the things in the pregame presentation step require the AppNap rule to complete, and this relies on having a known starting player. It's pretty clear, though, from some of the statements made in the MTR that the ordering given in that document is intended to be the official one. The fact that this implementation was chosen for Magic's digital clients lends extra credence to this evaluation. So if it makes a difference, I'd say lock in the sideboard before declaring player draw is the order to use. Seriously though, WotC, get this fixed. Please. For me. Another acting out of turn scenario that could come up is wanting to re-sideboard after the opponent declares they're using a different companion in game 2. The MTR ordering implies that this is not allowed as sideboarding occurs before companions are declared. My reading of the CR ordering agrees with this, although it's a little bit less clear-cut. Next up, let's say that Amy reveals a Providence and a Leyline of Hope. What life total does she go to? Is there more than one potentially correct answer? Alright, so we'll first notice that Providence says at the beginning of your first upkeep, your life total becomes 26. This means that Leyline of Hope will always be in play to see that happen, even if Providence was revealed first. Given that Amy's starting life total was 20, that game does see this as her gaining life, so that would mean that she's going to gain 1 extra and go to 27. If this is Commander, though, or some other format where the starting life total is higher, Amy's life total would still be set at 26, but in this case, of course, that would not count as her gaining life, so Leyline of Hope would do nothing. Alright, how about this? Amy puts 2 Leyline of Singularities in, then Nick puts in a Leyline of the Void. Into which zone is Amy's extra Leyline of Singularity put? To evaluate this, we'll recall that the legend rule is a state-based action. State-based actions are only performed at specific times during gameplay. Therefore, the legend rule would not happen during the pregame process, but rather during the first state-based action check during the game. Leyline of the Void would be in play at that point, so Amy's extra Leyline of Singularity would be exiled. What about this? Amy puts in a pregame Quicksilver. Nick really doesn't want to take 1 damage, so he flashes in Dress Down with some help from a couple of Spirit Guides and a Manamorphose, because this is a very serious rules question. Can Amy attack with Quicksilver this turn? And the answer is that she can. The Summoning Sickness rule says that Amy's creatures can't attack unless they've been under her control continuously since her most recent turn began. Guess what? Quicksilver has been under Amy's control since the very beginning of Amy's turn. Therefore, it can attack even though it doesn't have haste. The same rule shows up in a somewhat more relevant context of restarting the game with Karn Liberated, since it means that any creatures that were exiled with Karn can attack right away. There was also a meme deck in Legacy that had the game plan of running a bunch of Leylines with Opalescence to animate them. The dream opening hand was 5 Leylines, an Opalescence, and a Serra Sanctum, which would allow you to put the Opalescence into play on turn 1 and attack with all your Leylines for a turn 1 win. In contrast to Quicksilver, let's observe that the Goblin token generated by Chancellor of the Forge is created during its controller's upkeep. Since this creature, therefore, would not have been controlled since the very beginning of the turn, it really is necessary for it to have haste in order to attack. Alright, Nick's on the draw and he mulligans down to 1 card, which is a Gemstone Caverns. Can he start the game with it in play? And the answer is that he can. Gemstone Caverns is in his opening hand and he's not the starting player, so he can begin the game with the Gemstone Caverns on the battlefield. Although the instruction to exile a card from his hand is not optional, the ability doesn't state that you can only put Gemstone Caverns in if the instruction is possible to perform, nor does it specify any consequences if it's not possible. Therefore, Nick can start the game with 0 cards in hand and 1 land in play. The implications of this get a little bit more excited when you realize that actions are taken in the Leyline step 1 at a time. So if Nick had a bunch of Leylines and a Gemstone Caverns, he could choose to put all the Leylines in and then put the Caverns in last after getting rid of all the other cards in his hand, which is another way that this situation could come up. Next, let's say that Amy reveals Chancellor of the Annex and Nick puts in a Leyline of Life Force. Nick's first spell is a creature spell. What happens? And I guess this doesn't strictly have to do with the pregame procedure, but it is a fun one that I added in because at least it's a little bit related. So the answer is that creature spells can't be countered, so Nick does not have to pay 1 extra. He could if he wanted to, but his spell is going to resolve either way. That ability from Chancellor of the Annex only applies to the first spell Nick casts, meaning that once that happens, he's home free. And that's the pregame procedure. To recap, I like to think of it as having steps just like the phases of a Magic turn have. So just like the beginning phase has like the untap, upkeep, and draw steps, you can imagine that there's something like a pregame phase that would be composed of the starting player step, present step, opening hand step, and Leyline step. Obviously, that's somewhat simplified from all the complexity this has going on under the hood, but like you just saw, it's a great takeaway. And remember, pregame procedures happen before the start of Magic gameplay, so it's possible to do them before the round clock starts. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.